additional distinguished conservative leaders here with us tonight. We have in the House Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady of Texas. Congressman Ken Buck of Colorado. Congressman and Mrs. Barry Loudermilk of Georgia. Kentucky's Lieutenant Governor Janine Hampton. Nevada's Attorney General Adam Laxalt. Tennessee State Senator Brian Kelsey. Tennessee State Rep Timothy Hill. State Rep Julie Emerson of Louisiana. State Representative Rick Saccone of Pennsylvania. And in addition to Omarosa and KT mentioned earlier, we have the Honorable Andrew Brenberg, Assistant to the President and Director of the Domestic Policy Council. And last but not least, the Honorable Tom Honig, the Vice Chair of the FDIC. So give all these conservative leaders a great round of applause. Thank you.
All right. Wow, the Attorney General of Nevada. Or is it Nevada? I'm so confused after all that. I got to tell you, sir, the sports book at the Mirage is robbing me blind. And there needs to be an investigation. The spread is, it's always a half point different. And as my brother tells me, even if it's fixed, you still have a 50-50 chance of winning, so, and I don't. All right, time now to call on the ACU chairman, Matt Schlapp. What a week Matt Schlapp has had. Come on, can we give him some love, please? He does such a great job for the conservative movement and for ACU. And ACU Foundation Vice Chair Millie Hallow, who is actually running everything tonight. I guarantee it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes? Because I'm sort of short. I just want to tell you a little bit about the origin of this award. In the mid-90s, at a dinner honoring Jesse Helms, yes, Jean Kirkpatrick, ambassador, and Wayne LaPierre were sitting at a head table talking about political correctness on campus and the diminution of the conservative word. And thanks to then ACU Chairman David King, we were able to establish the Jean Kirkpatrick Academic Freedom Award. For a while, ACU tried to do it on his own. We picked some very interesting conservative types that had even more interesting day jobs. And we decided that we ought to turn it over to the pros. And so the entrance of the Bradley Foundation was heartfelt and needed. And we have so welcomed their partnership and their willingness to define the parameters of this award. So I just wanted to give you the history, and now Matt will introduce the Bradley Award convener.
Thank you, Millie. I don't know what this is going on with my throat. It could be exhaustion, maybe. I don't know. Has anybody seen me waddle down the hallway in the last 2 days? It's been quite a lot of that. If we could just get your attention, this is a very important award. I'm going to do what my mother used to do for me. Shh. Oh, it always works. It's so exciting. How blessed the American Conservative Union, indeed the entire conservative movement, is for the appointment of Rick Graber as the president and CEO of the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation. You all know the Bradley Foundation. They do great work. After the stewardship of Mike Grebe, we all wondered who would be the new guy or gal who would steer the ship. Well, our worries are over. As you all know, Rick Graber is that man. He's been the United States ambassador to the Czech Republic, a former international senior vice president of Honeywell, director of the Kern Family Foundation, and former state chairman of the Republican Party of Wisconsin. You got the right party there, Rick. Good job. It's my pleasure to bring to the stage my friend, the Honorable Rick Graber. Come on, Rick.
Good evening, and thank you, Millie and Matt. The American Conservative Union Foundation and the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation are pleased to announce that the winner of the 2017 Jean Jordan Kirkpatrick Award for Academic Freedom is John McAdams, Associate Professor of Political Science at Marquette University in Milwaukee. This prize includes an award of $10,000. And as Millie started to comment on, this award is named in memory of Dr. Kirkpatrick for her outspokenness, her strength, and her determination in the midst of opposition, and her dedication to free speech and American exceptionalism. Trained as an academic, Jean Kirkpatrick spent most of her life as a political science professor at Georgetown University here in Washington. As a lifelong Democrat, she increasingly found that the foreign policy of the Democratic Party was at odds with her own principles. Their approach, she famously said, was to blame America first. As ambassador to the United Nations under Ronald Reagan, she was known for the Kirkpatrick Doctrine, which advocated U.S. support for anti-communist governments. Her vision, her courage truly made a difference. But it was Jean Kirkpatrick's willingness to stare down hostile crowds on college campuses which really led to the creation of this award in her honor. In 1983, shouting down speakers was somewhat shocking and unusual, but what Stanley Kurtz calls the mother of all campus shoutdowns happened to her that February at UC Berkeley. In an act of defiance against the hecklers who completely drowned her out, Mrs. Kirkpatrick calmly continued on and finished her speech. She simply refused to be intimidated. The heckler's justification that oppressors don't deserve free speech was ludicrous at the time and remains so today, but it's an excuse that has become all too common 30 years later. Our award winner this evening, John McAdams, is a professor of political science at Marquette University, where he has taught since 1977. He's respected for the work in his field and is also nationally regarded as an expert on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Through his blog, The Marquette Warrior, he's been a consistent and thoughtful critic of political correctness, most particularly on the Marquette campus. A devout Catholic, Professor McAdams has frequently revealed activities on that campus that have embarrassed Marquette's administrators, or at the very least annoyed them. For instance, last spring he exposed a campus mural celebrating terrorist and FBI most wanted felon Assata Shakur, which was promptly removed in the wake of that publicity. And perhaps as a result of his opinions, Professor McAdams is now in the fight of his academic life. In the fall of 2014, a student asked his instructor why she had not permitted him to express his views on gay marriage in a philosophy class. She informed him that he didn't have the right to speak in her class and that his views on gay marriage might be offensive to certain students in the class. When the student attempted to complain to the administration, nothing was done. So he went to Professor McAdams, bringing with him a recording of his interaction with his instructor. John posted the incident on his blog, and a storm of controversy ensued. A month later, John was informed by his dean without explanation that he was suspended and banned from campus. Ultimately, it became clear that he was being accused of cyberbullying, with critics arguing that as a result of his blog, the instructor, who was a graduate student, had received denigrating emails. Last spring, Marquette's president announced that he would implement a unanimous recommendation from a faculty committee to suspend Professor McAdams through the fall 2016 semester. To this ruling, the president added the caveat that McAdams apologized for his, quote, reckless, close quote, behavior. John refused, saying that he was simply telling the truth about an incident between a graduate instructor and her student. Despite the professor's long and respected career, Marquette University effectively fired him, and John has sued. His court date is fast approaching. Professor McAdams' defense has been taken up by both the left and the right. The Atlantic magazine called Marquette's action an attack on academic freedom. FIRE's executive director, Robert Shibley, said, if Marquette can fire a tenured professor for criticizing a fellow teacher on a blog, then tenure at Marquette is worthless as our freedom of speech and academic freedom. Professor McAdams has been selected from a broad field of worthy and deserving candidates for his fearless and outspoken defense of academic freedom and free speech. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation, it is my pleasure to present the 2017 Jean Jordan Kirkpatrick Award for Academic Freedom to Professor John McAdams.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm not yet convinced that I actually deserve this award, but I'm really enjoying the perks. I was told by the Bradley Foundation that they were going to get me a room in this hotel, and then when I checked in, I found I was in something called the Riverview Suite. I went up to it and found out that, number one, it really does have a river view, and number two, it is a real suite. Now you ask, why are you impressed by this? I'm a kind of ordinary academic, so my view of suites is sort of, suites are defined by 2.5-star motels just off the interstate in southern Illinois, and here I am in a really fine suite, so thank you, Bradley. But the issue for tonight is, how have we come to where we are in academia? How is it that a place in American society that ought to be the most open and tolerant of different ideas is, for the most part, the most intolerant, the most closed place in the society? So I'm going to give you just a little bit of history. It's important to remember that for much of the 20th century, about 2/3 of the 20th century, threats to academic freedom came from conservatives. Conservative trustees, conservative alumni who were big donors, conservative state legislators. And academics who leaned liberal, then as now, produced a kind of elaborate justification for academic freedom. The AAUP, American Association of University Professors, came out with classic statements about academic freedom in 1915 and 1940. And they were pretty compelling. Not only was it compelling to those liberals, it was compelling to a lot of conservatives, particularly those who resonated to John Stuart Mill's on liberty. And that prevailed for a while. But then there was an inflection point in the 1960s. Academia in the 60s prospered. Huge increases in enrollments, huge increases in number of faculty. Also, by the 1960s, academics had begun to feel quite secure in their own academic freedom because of their own political power and the political power of, say, allies in the liberal media. They felt that, you know, hey, our freedom is secure. Under those circumstances, we might expect a group that has had a robust notion of academic freedom to start finding it appealing to shut up people on the other side, people whose views they see as evil, right? So I'm confident that I can say what I want. They can't shut me up, but hey, there are these other people saying evil things. Let's shut them up. So what you had in the 1960s was a cohort of college students, not all college students in the 60s, just some, but college students who tended to self-select into academia, that started embracing ideologies that said we can shut up speech we think is bad speech. The intellectual mentor of these people was a fellow named Herbert Marcuse, who talked about something called repressive tolerance. Repressive tolerance, in his view, was tolerance of bad ideas, and liberating tolerance was tolerance of good ideas, and he thought bad ideas should not be tolerated. And a fair number of students adopted this. Now, the media have been saying recently, isn't it ironic that at Berkeley you have riots because they don't like Milo, but that was the beginning of the free speech movement. That's too simplistic. There were in the free speech movement some genuine libertarians who believed in free speech, but a lot of the free speech movement were nasty authoritarians who wanted free speech for themselves and were the same people who felt it was all right to shout down speakers they disagreed with, who felt it was all right to occupy an administration building and shut down a university because they didn't like the Vietnam War. Now, these people, a lot of them went into academia. So in the 1970s and 80s, you had some talk about tenured radicals, okay? But it's only been fairly recently that this whole process has played itself out to completion. Because remember, you're an undergraduate, you've got to graduate. Then you go to graduate school, it takes at least 4 years, maybe 7 to graduate. Then you get a teaching job, and it takes a few years to get tenure. And the first part of your teaching job, you're a junior person. Graduate students don't flock to you. You don't mentor a lot of people. So it takes a lot of years before you can start reproducing yourself. You can start producing a bunch of people like yourselves. So what we have in academia today is, in at least a lot of disciplines, certainly the humanities, the soft social sciences, the intellectual children and grandchildren of the authoritarians in the 60s generation. And that, I think, is why all of a sudden, remember, we've had the example of Jeane Kirkpatrick that you heard. We've had that for a while, but all of a sudden it seems to be all over the place. That's because these people have come to so thoroughly dominate academia that they even dominate places like Marquette University and lots of institutions that used to be Catholic or something like that. Now, another important factor here is bureaucratic bloat. If you're a university bureaucrat, well, all bureaucrats like to have a large organization. They like to have lots of subordinates. And it's important to understand, if you're a university dean or provost or president, the faculty is not your bureaucracy. Faculty run their own affairs. So if you want a bureaucracy, you're going to have a bureaucracy in your own office. You're going to have assistant and associate provost, assistant, associate deans, third assistant provost for things Hispanic, etc. And one obvious way of hiring a lot of people is to hire people with diversity or inclusion or multiculturalism in their names. So this is what the administrators do, and then they proceed to set about doing things that have the effect of stifling speech. Some examples. Harassment. Universities are required to give all their employees training about harassment and how to avoid harassment. Marquette University does this. Okay? The online module about harassment is terrible. For example, it says if you tell an ethnic joke to someone and they're not offended, they think it's funny and they're happy, that's still wrong because that's harassment. Now, the problem with that is the law of harassment is very clear, and nothing is harassing unless it is unwanted. Any communication that is wanted is not harassing. Even worse, in the module Marquette uses, there's an example of a conversation between two employees who are talking about how they oppose gay marriage. Another employee overhears this conversation and is unhappy about it. People who take this training module are told that the two women who were simply talking to each other about their opposition to gay marriage have harassed the third fellow, who may not even be gay, who takes exception to what they said. In other words, Marquette's harassment training says, in effect, don't say anything political that someone might take exception to. The whole notion of offensiveness is used to shut up speech. At Marquette, back about 2005, a philosophy graduate student put on his door a sign that said, "As Americans, we must always remember that we all have a common enemy, an enemy that is dangerous, powerful, and relentless. I refer, of course, to the federal government." I think probably lots of people here would endorse that. Okay, he's a libertarian. Fine. Several people in the philosophy department at Marquette complained about that sign, and the chair of the philosophy department, having gotten those complaints, went to his executive committee, that's other professors that are supposed to advise him, and they decided it was offensive. And in fact, he wrote the graduate student the following. He said, "While I am a strong supporter of academic freedom, I'm afraid that hallways and office doors are not free speech zones. If material is patently offensive and has no obvious academic import or university sanction, I have little choice but to take note." So his little sign was torn down. Marquette sided with the department chair, saying it's not a free speech issue, it's a workplace issue. The workplace is a university. Then, of course, you have speech codes. Some of these are absurdly broad. Marquette's speech code is itself absurdly broad. I won't read it all to you, but I will say the definition is behavior, offensive behavior, behavior hostile and demeaning, or which could or does result in mental, emotional, or physical discomfort, embarrassment, ridicule, or harm. Note that. It's harassing if it results in mental discomfort. What should a university education do other than create some mental discomfort? Of course, I think we all know that an outspoken atheist creating mental discomfort among Christians, that wouldn't count. Or whites who resented being berated about their white privilege wouldn't count. Then there are bias incident reporting systems that are a higher tech version of the East German Stasi. And at one place, the University of Northern Colorado, a professor decided to discuss transgenderism in class. And people sort of said things favorable or unfavorable to the notion of transgenderism. The professor, viewing himself as a devil's advocate, said, "Well, gosh, people are just two genders. You can't just be whatever gender they want." He was reported to the administration through the bias incident reporting system, and the bias response team contacted the professor, and encouraged him to avoid discussing that issue again. They told him to avoid stating opinions, his own or the students on the topic. Aggression. That's in an official document from the chancellor of the entire system. So, academia is in a tough situation, and you might ask Lenin's question, what is to be done? I don't begin to have time to tell you tonight. In fact, I don't exactly know. I know doing something about it will have to involve state legislatures and parents and donors and students. But I do know this: if anything is done about it, it will be done by the people who are here tonight and other people who are like the people who are here tonight, who will stand up for free speech on campus. That's going to have to happen if we save the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I have 4 children. I'm not quite to the schlap level of procreation. I've done my best. And my oldest is 17 right now, and we're starting to tour universities. And can you homeschool college? Is that an option? Trust me, I'm thinking about it. I hope you're all enjoying your dinner. We will continue the program as we continue to eat, as we are having a very efficient evening. And I would, to that end, like to introduce Leonard Leo and Adam White to bring us a very important update on the Supreme Court. Who here cares about the Supreme Court a little bit? They're all yours. Good, thank you. Gentlemen.
Well, thank you. So, the title of the talk is The Importance of the Judiciary.
So-called judiciary.
Yeah. Nominating Supreme Court justices is one of the most important jobs the president has, and so before we begin, we just wanted to ask, how do people think of the job the president is doing so far?
Now, before we get into it, before we get into Neil Gorsuch, because this is the Ronald Reagan dinner, I think there's something really important we have to do tonight. I think we have to first raise our glasses to President Ronald Reagan for appointing the man whose seat we're going to be talking about tonight, and secondly, to raise our glasses to Antonin Scalia, who spent 30 years in great service to our country on the U.S. Supreme Court. 2 very great men.
Here, here.
All right, now we can talk about Neil Gorsuch.
And thank you for giving me an excuse to bring my wine to the podium. Thank you very much. But Leonard, you are not only a fan of Justice Scalia, you're a close friend, a colleague of Justice Scalia, and so this must have been a very poignant and challenging moment, helping the new administration seek out somebody who befits the seat that Justice Scalia left vacant?
There is no replacement for Justice Scalia. There's only a successor. And that's where Neil Gorsuch is. And look, Neil Gorsuch is a really worthy successor. He's an extraordinary man, great legal talent, but even more importantly than that, he's a man of courage. You know, there are a lot of smart people who can serve on the Supreme Court, Adam. But what you really need on the court is you need courage, you need strength. What President Trump was saying after the election was he wanted a justice on the court who was, quote, not weak. He wanted someone who was going to do what needed to be done. He was going to stick to his guns when it was a tough case. And that's what we have in Judge Gorsuch.
So let's take a step back. President Trump is elected, he's inaugurated, and through all of this, you're searching for somebody to fill this seat. How did you go about, what were you looking for in the candidates to fill this seat? And you played a role from very early on.
Well, first of all, it's what the president was looking for. Going all the way back to the campaign, President Trump understood the importance, the awesome responsibility he was going to have in naming a justice to the U.S. Supreme Court. And early on, from the very start, he set down a number of really important criteria. He said he wanted a man of extraordinary legal talent, someone who was going to be respected by all. He wanted someone who was, and these are his words, he wanted someone who was going to interpret the Constitution the way the framers meant it to be. And finally, he wanted a person who was not going to be weak. And by that he meant someone who was not going to be looking over his shoulder, not thinking about his legacy, but thinking about defending the Constitution of the United States, which is a justice's oath of office.
And so let's look ahead. What happens next? The nomination was announced on January 31st. There's going to be hearings. What happens next?
What happens next? Those of you who are from Washington, you all know what happens next, right? The Democrats at every turn engage in obstruction and delay. That's what happens next. And what happens after that is we demand that they do their job. That they do their job.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that we've got a really tight schedule here. You know, we're reaching the end of a Supreme Court term, and we want the ninth justice on the court to break as many ties as there may be. And what that means is that we've got to get a Supreme Court justice confirmed in early April, before the Senate recesses on April 10th. And we're not going to have a hearing until March 20th. So we're going to have a really tight schedule, and we're not going to be able to allow Democrats to engage in the normal obstruction and delay tactics. What it means is that if the Democrats are not willing to do their job, then they need to cancel their vacation in April, and they need to stay, and they need to get the job done.
But, Leonard, I have good news. For the last year, the Democrats have been saying...
The good news is we're going to win. That's the good
right.
news.
But the good news is the Democrats have said for the last year that they need a justice immediately, that it's time to put a ninth judge on the court. So surely the Democrats will proceed with all deliberate speed and get somebody voted in.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they won't be hypocrites.
So what happens if they filibuster?
Well, if the Democrats filibuster, the usual rule is we got to get 60 votes. And my hope is that we've got 8 Democrats somewhere out there in the Senate who can see past this particular battle and understand that there's a big election in 2018. And they may want to be with us on this one, because the American people spoke very loudly in November. They knew there was a Supreme Court vacancy, and they elected President Trump to fill that seat. And he's doing just that, nominating Judge Gorsuch. But, you know, look, if they don't want to give us the 60 votes, then we may have to do what Senator Reid and Senator Schumer said they would do, which is invoke what's called the Reid precedent, or the nuclear option, and do it with 51 votes. Which, by the way, is the Senate's precedent anyway. You know, when the Democrats nominated Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan to the Supreme Court, guess what? We had a 51-vote majority to confirm them. Way back when we had Clarence Thomas and Bob Bork, 51 votes. That's the tradition of the Senate. For almost 200 years, 51 votes. None of this 60-vote threshold. That's a fiction. That's something made up by an obstructionist Democrat Party in the early 2000s.
Okay, so Obviously, we want Judge Gorsuch confirmed as quickly as possible, but a confirmation hearing is an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to spell out a vision for how we think the Constitution should be interpreted, what the Constitution means, what the Constitution protects. And so there will be a hearing and there will be questions. What do you think are the most important issues or aspects of constitutionalism that you think this hearing process will make clear?
Well, I hope that the hearing will do one very important thing, and that is show the American people how important it is to understand the relationship between what I call our structural Constitution and the preservation of liberty in our country. So what really protects, and Justice Scalia always used to say this, he used to go around from law school to law school and he used to say, what really protects the American people? What makes America great? And, you know, some law student would always get up and say, oh, it's the First Amendment or it's the Bill of Rights. And he'd say, no, any tin-ear dictatorship, any dictator for life, even the evil empire, the Soviet Union, they've all got great bills of rights, some of them even longer than ours. But what makes America great, what makes it important, what really protects our freedom is the separation of powers, the checks and balances, federalism, limits on the judiciary, what we call the structural Constitution. And I hope that during this hearing, Judge Gorsuch will have an opportunity to unfold that for the American people. Because if you look at Judge Gorsuch's record, the one thing you will see more than anything else is an incredible, deep devotion to that structural Constitution and how it is inextricably intertwined to the defense and preservation of liberty in our great country.
And one part about Judge Gorsuch's record I find particularly interesting is he's been a staunch proponent of rolling back the amount of deference that courts give administrative agencies. He's part of this ongoing national discussion about just fundamentally rethinking the administrative state, I would say the progressive administrative state.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know Adam White, this guy's an administrative law geek, okay? So I was expecting this question.
I sneak it in at every meal.
So look, this is an interesting debate that we're having actually with the Senate Democrats right now. I don't know how many of you have seen a couple of these Senate courtesy meetings that Judge Gorsuch has been having, but in a lot of them, the Democrats come out of their offices and they say, well, you know, we just have to make sure that we have an independent judge, right? That we have a judge who's not going to be a rubber stamp for the president's agenda. And I'd say two things to that. One, Judge Gorsuch has shown in his record that he is very willing and is very skeptical about the administrative state. He wants to make sure that when the administrative state acts, when regulatory power is exercised, that it's justified under a Constitution or laws of the United States. So he's no shrinking violet when it comes to executive power. He has struck down administrative regulations when they have derogated from a statute or derogated from the Constitution. But here's the really interesting thing I have found in all of this. On the one hand, the Democrats want to say we need someone who's not a rubber stamp. We need a judge who's independent. But then they turn around and they express dismay every time they see a Gorsuch opinion that strikes down a federal regulation or that slaps the wrists of the executive branch. They can't have it both ways. So in addition to delay and obstruction, the other thing we'll all see, which is a typical Washington response, is contradiction. And you will see throughout the hearings Democrats engaging in the most contradictory thing possible. 1 minute telling us they want an independent judge, the next minute telling us they want Judge Gorsuch to predetermine the result in every important case that might come before him. And this is what we're going to see in the hearings, but hopefully he can cut through that and really give the American people a sense for what he stands for and that he's a man of courage and what the Constitution really means in our country.
Now, this is obviously a very important appointment, but it's not the only judicial appointment that President Trump will make. And I don't just mean perhaps future Supreme Court appointments. He's going to appoint dozens and dozens, over 100 appellate court nominees. Tell us what you think about his vision of this. And you're on leave from the Federalist Society right now, so I know you're playing a strong role in advising this administration. What do you see as the administration's vision for the lower courts?
Well, first of all, just one thing I want to say about the opportunities this president has to reshape the federal judiciary so it defends our Constitution. You're quite right, Adam, that there's a really good possibility that this president gets one more or two more or maybe three more vacancies on the U.S. Supreme Court. And that will affect this country for 1 or 2 generations to come. And so that's going to be a really important thing. And make no mistake, how we deal with this vacancy right now, the strength that we as a pro-Constitution movement demonstrate in this fight will determine the extent to which we are able to both nominate and confirm pro-Constitution judges as we move forward and other vacancies appear on the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, with regard to everything else, as many of you know, the president has 105 vacancies to fill. 105 vacancies. And there are some people who believe that before the end of his first term, there could be as many as 70 to 90 Court of Appeals vacancies that have to be filled. In other words, he may be able to shape over 40% of our federal court system. It's an awesome, enormous responsibility.
And Leonard, let's finish where we started with Justice Scalia. He's left an immense legacy on the law. I'm very fortunate, as mentioned earlier, I was very fortunate to get to teach a class at the Scalia School of Law, which I never tire of saying, and I see Professor Adam Ossoff here and others who get the privilege of teaching at that school. How would you describe Justice Scalia's legacy in Washington, in constitutionalism, and just in general?
I think he taught the American people and a generation or so of people in the legal profession and the judiciary that Americans have to learn to love gridlock. They have to learn to love a system of government where there are breaks and separation of powers and where the structure of our Constitution matters in terms of the preservation of liberty. We have a lot of fancy words from that. You know, he was an originalist, he was a textualist, he believed in the structural Constitution. But at the end of the day, what he really believed in was the power of a Constitution to protect liberty, and he believed in the idea that his job was simply to apply the law and interpret it and not to make it up. And as we move forward with the Gorsuch nomination, I very much hope we'll have another justice on the court, a successor to Justice Scalia, who will continue that rich tradition.
Well, Leonard, I think in the end you're right. I think that for Justice Scalia it comes down to the words up there, we the people. And so I thank you for all the work you're doing to help this administration. I thank the administration for naming somebody like Judge Gorsuch, and they're going to need all the support they can get. But thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being a part of this fight. We need you. We need you.
It's Match Laugh's world. We're just living in it. Adam White, by the way, Adam White, if I can plug Weekly Standard, where I'm the online editor, Adam White's writing at Weekly Standard will make you smarter just for clicking on it, let alone reading it. So you must do so. Oh, it's Matt's turn to talk. Okay, bye.
You're not going anywhere. All right. Now we get to do something really cool. If I could get everyone's attention. Don't make me do that thing again. Where's Mom?